Hey guys, this is Mitch with FinePoint CGI, and today we're going to talk about how to create a flexible saving and loading system inside of Godot. So we're going to go through the process of planning out what we want to build. Then we're going to put that plan into action. We're actually going to build a basic saving and loading system. So hopefully once you get to that point, you can pretty much just leave the tutorial and kind of move on and build your own thing if you want a very basic load system. But if you want to kind of jump into a more advanced system, something that has save slots or something that's more flexible, like saving scene information and things like that in a nice flexible way, that's what we're going to cover in the rest of that tutorial. And we're going to build out a really cool interface that we can use to keep track of all of our save slots. And finally, we're going to build a pause menu to kind of allow us to save and load our game. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing we have to talk about is some disclaimers. So this tutorial is standalone, but it is also a part of a series. So this is a part of my Godot horror game series. So if you haven't checked that out, you're welcome to. Just go ahead and look it up or check out the playlist that has all of that. But this is standalone, so it should just work even if you don't want to follow that entire 12 hours of tutorial to just get to where we are. So just to let you guys know, this should work one way or the other. We do interact a little bit with the game manager, so that's something to keep in mind. But other than that, it should just work. So with that being said, the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually plan out what our system is going to look like. Now, if you guys remember the overall design of our stuff, and I know it's been a while, but we have a game manager, and that kind of allows everyone to flow through that to communicate to each other, right? So what we'll need to do is we'll need to add in a save manager like this. We'll also need to add in a UI manager if we haven't already. I'll have to check the actual project, but we'll need to have a UI manager to just kind of signal the different UI elements, because part of this tutorial is going over how to actually build a pause menu and how to actually build out a save system that goes with that. So that's something that we're going to have to look at. So in here, we're going to have our main menu and our pause menu, and that's also how we're going to get to our save system. Now our save manager is going to be interact through our game manager. So our pause menu, when you click on the pause and you click like I want to save, it's going to go game manager dot save manager dot save, right? So we'll need the ability to save, we'll need the ability to load like this, like that. And when we do our saving, we're going to need to do a couple of functions. So the first one that we have to do is save the actual scene we're in. So save scene info, which is basically just where we are, things like that. We're also going to need to save player info, and we're also going to need to save our actual object information. Now, when we try to save our stuff out, I also would like to take a picture of our scene. So I'll take a picture so that when we do our UI, we actually have a picture to go with, because the type of save system I want to do is similar to like Baldur's Gate, where you can actually hit escape, hit save, and you could pick different slots and they have pictures of where you were at that time. I feel like that's a very common system, and it's something that nobody's really explained how to do. So I think that will be useful. Now, when we load our stuff, we need to load our player information. We need to load our scene information, right? And we need to load our object information. Now, the thing about saving object information, the thing about loading object information is that since the player is not going to be in the scene at the time of loading, we're going to need to lazy load some of this data. So we can load our scene information, our player information, because that's stuff that's already going to be spawned, or that's stuff that's going to be used in loading our actual scene, right? We load our scene, we move our player, and then we need to load in our object info. So if we take our load, let's come in here and let's bring this up. We'll bring this in here, we'll bring this up. And what we'll do when we want to load is first we'll select our scene to load. And then what we'll do is we'll load the scene info which means we're going to head out to our game manager and tell our game manager to load our scene. And then we'll basically come down here and we'll basically say, okay, once our game manager has loaded our scene, it's going to move our player, right, to where it needs to be. It's going to load the player information and then move the player. And then once it has that, from there, we can actually come in and load and apply scene information. And I think that that's kind of how we're going to approach our loading system. Now, when it comes to saving, thankfully, that's going to be a lot easier because we can basically just save our data. We don't really have to deal with too much. So we can actually just come in here and just grab the scene info, and then we'll save scene info to JSON, and then we'll have to get and save player info, and then we'll need to get all of our actual scene objects, and then we'll need to loop through them, and then we'll need to save them. Now we're going to want to do this. Now the way we're going to want to approach this is by basically saying, okay, we're going to be looping through these scene objects, but they all might have different parameters. So I think we're going to need to modify our save objects to actually have scene objects to actually have save functions. So I should probably call that out. So save objects with their save function, which means they probably also need to do the same thing here, but with their load function. So we probably need to load and apply and then loop through the scene and then load their objects as well. Something like that is what I'm thinking for the load and save system. I think that's relatively simple. And since we're going to need a pause menu, I imagine, and a main menu, I'm thinking that we're going to need to change our game manager to have some kind of global pause state. So we'll need to look at that. And I think we'll need to look at, and for our pause menu and our main menu, I'm thinking that we can kind of architect it out to look kind of like this. So we have our pause menu, which will be very basic. It'll just basically be like this, very simple. So we'll just add in these guys, of course, like this, and we'll have something that says like continue, save, load, maybe an options, and then maybe a exit like that. And that's what I'm thinking that we'll do for kind of like a design. It's not super difficult, and I'm sure we can pretty it up later in the series at some point in time, but I think that'll be the simplest design that we can come up with that will work. Now, when the user clicks on load, I think what we'll do is we'll make a box kind of like this, and I think we'll have a panel right here, which will have the saved game like this. So it'll have the game name like that. And I think we'll have a back button probably here. And then we'll probably have a load button here. That's kind of how they do it in Baldur's Gate as well, is that they have a back and a load button like this. And then we can have a picture of our player right here, or a picture of like the scene that they're looking at. And then maybe we could have some text kind of like the name of the save like this. And then maybe we could have something like date of save. And I think that might do it. So then you get some user information and stuff like that, which means we'll probably need to save that information somewhere. So we probably should come over to our save section. And also once it's done looping through these saved objects, we can come here, let's say, save information like that. And then we'll have maybe some additional save information as well. I think that will probably work. So that's what I'm thinking, is we'll have something like this. We'll have something like this. This is kind of how we're going to approach this. And this is, I think, how we're going to approach our loading and our saving. Now we will need additional stuff. I imagine that we're going to need to have like a load button, GD function. I imagine that we're going to need to have some kind of way to manage our state. So I imagine that we'll need to look at that. But I think that that's basically the gist of what I'm thinking that we're going to approach it as. So I guess with that being said, let's go ahead and get started and take a look at this. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we need to actually build out our save system. Now, thankfully, this should be relatively easy. All we have to do is create a save and load manager. If you remember when we were talking about the design, we said that we were going to have a save and load manager that kind of handles everything. And then it's going to interact with our game manager and basically work with that. So what we'll do is we'll come over to scripting. We're going to go to File, New Script, and we will add in a new script, and we'll call it Save Load Manager. Like that. And that's going to open up VS Code here, and we will run through with VS Code. So first things first, for us to be able to save our stuff, we'll come in here and we'll say public void save game. We're going to put parentheses like that, and we're going to open and close our brackets. And we'll need to add in a parameter here so that way we can actually have a name for our game to save by. So what we'll do is we'll type string and we'll put in name. Now, once we get in here, we need to actually save our information. Now, in our case, we're going to save our stuff out to our user folder. So if you don't know, Godot has two major folders that it uses. It uses the RES folder and the user folder. The idea behind the RES folder is where all of your resources are located. So it's basically where all of your project information is located. So basically, textures, models, things like that. Whereas on the other side, you have the user section, which is where all your save data and things that you need to access and write and rewrite. So if you had something like a user picture or something like that, you would want to save it in that location. Now, in order to save our data, first things first, we need to make sure that we check to see if a directory exists. So we can say dir access dir is equal to dir access.open, and we'll pass in our quote user : // And in order for us to actually save our data, we could just save it in our user folder. So if I actually bring up my user folder, so I go back to Godot, click project, go into my open user data folder, you can see we have this stuff right here. Now, we could just come in here and actually just save our data in this folder directly. But what I would rather do is I would rather save my stuff inside of its own folder, something like saved games or something like that. So what we'll do is we'll actually create that if it doesn't exist. Now, the reason why we're going to create the directory inside of code instead of just right-clicking and creating the directory is because we want our code to be flexible. So if it's not there, we need to create it. So we'll say if dir exists, quote save games, like that, then we'll go ahead and create it. dir.make dir, and then we'll just pass in saved games. Now, I know some of you who are more C# focused people will look at this and go, hold on, why are you not just using C#'s file access system or directory access system? And the reason why is because this user directory right here is a Godot named directory. So we can't just use C# for that. We actually need to use our own stuff. Now, we could go through and pull back the full directory if we wanted to and then go that route, but it's just generally easier to use the Godot built-in system for this. So once we have our dir made, we can just say dir is equal to dir access.open, and we'll pass in user : / saved games, like that. I'm going to do a tiny bit of pre-built coding here. So I already know that we're going to have save slots. So I'm just going to build in the code for that. So I'm going to say if not dir exists, quote name, then we'll go ahead and make that dir.make dir, and we'll pass in name, like that. And instead of doing quote name, we'll need to just do regular name. And also, I made a mistake up here. You can see we have a if dir exists, then make the dir. So if not dir exists, so if it doesn't exist, then let's make that directory. And now we basically need to save some of our data. So when we save our data, we basically need to create a dictionary of data, and then we need to basically serialize that data. So what are some of the data that we want to save? Well, in this initial setup, let's just save which scene we're on and where we spawned. Because if you remember in a previous tutorial, I believe it was creating a flexible loading system, if I remember correctly, we talk about building an actual level loading system, and we use our game manager to basically load our level, right? And then we tell it to use our loading screen to basically load a specific level. You can see right here, level C node, load level. If we go to that definition, you can see here that it runs through and it actually does a resource get and it loads our level. Well, we pass in a path and an index, and that means because we want to save our data Because we want to load a level, we need to save this data so that our load system actually knows what it's using. So that means inside of our game manager, when we run load level, we need to set our path and our index to some kind of global variable that we can use. So let's head up here and say public string path and public string index, like that. Or I guess in this case, this is an integer. So we'll say int index, and I'm going to capital I and capital P. Once we have these guys, we can come down here and say path is equal to path, and then index is equal to index. And now that I think about it, I'm going to come in here and say, let's rename this to loaded level. I think that'll be a little bit easier to understand. So we'll say loaded level and then loaded level index. I think that'll actually be easier because I'm thinking about it. I'm working my way through it. And I think that this would be a better name than what we actually currently have. So we'll grab that, we'll paste that in, and there we go. And now we'll go to our save load manager and we'll come down here and we're going to make a dictionary. So we'll type dict like that, and we'll type string, comma, string like that. And we'll call it save game data is equal to a new dictionary string, and then we'll say save game data dot add quote loaded level, comma, game manager dot instance dot loaded level, and then we will copy this, paste, and we're going to make it say spawn index, and I should probably capital this L just to make it a little bit easier to read, and we'll say dot loaded level index like that, and we're going to dot to string that, so that way it is a string value. There we go. And now we're going to save our data. Now we have two ways of saving our data. We can either use the Godot method, which is using JSON stringify, or we can use a different tool. In my case, I'm going to use Newtonsoft JSON, which I already have imported in the project. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about why we have instance here, okay? Because again, if you're not coming directly from my previous tutorial series, then you will not know what this means. So if you head over to the game manager, you can see I have a public static instance. That is my way of making my game manager completely global within my project. So that's something to keep in mind. So when you have a public static game manager instance, that allows me on startup to basically say, hey, if I don't exist, then create a game manager. And then that way, throughout all of my code, I can call game manager.instance dot, and then I can get a hold of all of that information. So that's kind of how I approached it. Now, I know some people are going to be mad about the toString. It's up to you guys on how you guys want to approach this, but to me, the toString seems like an easier way to do it, at least for right now, before I start going into creating objects and stuff like that to make a more flexible save system. So this is basically just how to save information. We'll make this a little bit better and a little bit more efficient later. So in order to use JSON.NET, we actually need to add it to our project. Now, you might be asking why I want to use Newtonsoft JSON, and that's because Newtonsoft JSON is widely considered basically the standard inside of C# for doing serialization and deserialization of data. It's basically the standard at this point, and it's been the standard for years. And I know Microsoft has worked on their own system, but it's just not quite there yet. And hopefully with .NET 8, it will be. But for right now, we're going to use Newtonsoft. So what I'll do is I'll go up here, I'll click on View Terminal, and it'll pop up here. Now, for us to add packages to our project, it's actually really easy. We can just type .NET add package newtonsoft.json, and we can just hit enter like that. And it's going to go ahead and attempt to install it. So now, in theory, it looks like it installed properly, judging by what I can read. So we'll type JSON convert dot serialize object, and then we can just pass in our dictionary saved game data like that. Now, if we hover over serialize object, you'll notice it returns a string. So that means we have to create something for that. So we'll say string JSON is equal to JSON convert serialize object. We probably should name this something a bit better. So let's just call it save JSON, I think. And then we'll come down here and we'll say var file access file is equal to file access.open, and we're going to open up a file. Now, when we open up our file, we need to actually decide what the name of that file is going to be, or what file we're actually going to open. And the nice thing about file access is when you do an open, it automatically creates the file if it does not exist. So that's going to save us a lot of trouble. So what are we going to do here? Well, what we'll do is we'll come in here and say $ quote user : / saved games / bracket name / bracket name .json, and that's going to create a file if it does not exist. And then we have to tell Godot how we want to handle it. So we have read, we have write, we have read write, and then we have write read. And you might be asking, okay, hold on, why do we have read write and write read? Well, if you open up a file for writing first, then writing is going to be faster than if you open up a file with reading first. So that's kind of the big difference, is if you do read write, then reading is going to be faster than writing, but you can do both. If you do write read, then writing is going to be faster than reading, but you can still do both. Or you can just do write or read. And in our case, I'm going to do write, because I don't really need to read it, at least in this specific function. And now I'm going to store that data. So I'm going to say file.store string, and I'm going to do my save JSON like that. Awesome. Now we just have to call this function to save our data. So to run this code, all we have to do is basically just create a button to run it. And that should be relatively simple. So we'll head back to our project here. We're going to go into our level 1 wake up game here. And I'm going to go to where my character is. So if I remember correctly, our character actually gets spawned outside of all of this. So what we'll do is we'll go hunt down our character. So character, we'll head over to our player, and we'll come in here and open up our inventory. And our inventory is basically where we have our inventory, right? The reason why I'm using the inventory temporarily is because I don't want to create an entire pause menu system just yet. So I'm going to use this as kind of something I can hijack off of to actually do all the things I needed to do. So I'm going to right click my inventory menu, add in a child node. I'm going to add in a button like so. I'm going to drag this guy over here onto the right like so. And I'm just going to type save game like that. I'm going to click on my node, and I'm going to go button down, and I'll pass that into, I guess, my inventory temporarily. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to double click on this guy. I'm going to say save game, which I should probably lowercase that a. And then I'm going to go to node button down, and I guess I'll go with my inventory, as much as I don't really know if I want to, but I guess I'll go with this. I'm going to click connect. We'll come down here to the bottom, and we'll say public paste bracket like that, and we'll add void, and then we'll need a link to our actual save load manager. Now currently save load manager inherits from node, so what we could do is we could pull it off from being a node and then make it into a utility class, which I think I might actually do. So let's pull this off. Let's get rid of these guys, because we're not going to ever do anything in ready or process anyway, so we can just get rid of that. And then we should be able to just make this into a public static class. And then that's going to make it into a static class. But that means because of that, we're going to need to make our function static as well. So public static void saved game. And that should just make this into a utility class effectively. And now we can just come into our inventory and say save load manager dot save game. And then we can just pass in a name. So I'm going to pass in test. And now in theory, we should be able to play our game. So if we head over to our game here, hit Control S, we go to game base, hit play, hopefully it will just run. It'll probably crash, but we'll see. Click start game, hit spacebar, and our game has started, which is awesome. So now we can hit I for inventory, and you'll see that save game is attached to our inventory, so that's not great. So let's take a look at where I put this. I put it on the inventory button, so that's my fault. So we'll drag this guy out into our inventory itself. I'm going to re-hide my inventory button, and I'll hide my crafting menu because I don't really need that to exist for right now. I'm going to hit Control S. That's all my fault. And I'm going to disconnect and then reconnect that to my inventory. So that way it's all connected properly. I'm going to go into my game base, hit play, and let's try that one more time. Hit start game, spacebar. We'll hit inventory, save game. And you'll see, we're getting a bunch of debugging errors. So that's not good. But that's more of a Godot issue. It looks like they made changes to the light detect system. So I'm going to jump into that real quick and take a look, because I feel like light detect, it's a node 3D. It's mad because it says that we cannot cast a Godot sub viewport to sub viewport. So that says that it's in light detect number 22. So right here is when it's doing a cast, and it's mad at us because it says that we are unable to cast type Godot sub viewport to type sub viewport. Let's see if we add a Godot.sub viewport, if that just solves our problem, because I want to make sure that everything works before we even get into this too deep. And there we go. That solved our problem. I just had to change it as a Godot sub viewport, and now it's fine. So if we hit I, save, and if we come out to our project, open user data folder, you can see we have a saved game folder here. If we double click on that, you can see we have a test. And if we double click on that, we have a test.json. So that's awesome, right? If we open this test.json up inside of VS Code here, you'll see it is unfortunately empty. So what's going on? Why is it empty? Well, that's actually relatively simple to explain. So unlike GDScript, in C# you need to close your file. So to close your file, you just come in here and type file.close. And that should force it to flush the data to the file and have it be good to go. Because the way that GDScript works is once it writes the data to the file, it automatically closes it and has it ready to go once you leave the functional scope. But in C#, unfortunately, it doesn't. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, once we have this, we should be able to just come back to our game here, hit play, start game, spacebar, I, save game, and then Alt tab back into our folder here. You'll see we have a test.json. You'll see it's now 1 kilobyte. So if we double click that, it has a small amount of information. Now, unfortunately, it looks like it's not the correct amount of information. So that means something's broken somewhere. So if we take a look at our game manager and we scroll down to load level, it looks like it is set up correctly here. But if we click on our references, well, it looks like our request for our document has failed, so that's not ideal. But if I remember correctly, the way we got to this location is by clicking on the start game and our main menu. So let's take a look at our main menu, and you'll see that we are actually loading our game through our get node load screen. So let's change that. So we'll come in here and we'll just type game manager dot instance dot load level, like that, and then hopefully that will work. Because the problem is that we were going through our actual load screen itself to load our data and not our actual game manager. So stuff wasn't getting set up properly. So if we head back to our game here and we refresh it and take a look at it, start game, inventory, save game, and then we head back out to here, we double click on it, you'll see now we have the data that we're looking for. Awesome. So now all we have to do is load our data. So we'll head over to our save load manager and we'll add in the ability to load our game. So we'll say public dictionary string comma string load game, like that. And since this is a static class, we need to make it a static dictionary. So static dictionary string load game. We're going to pass in a string and we're going to pass in the name, or basically the path of where we want to load our data. Now, when we load our data, it's going to be relatively simple. We'll just basically say file access file is equal to file access.open quote user : / saved games / and because I want to put in variables in here, I'm going to put a $sign right here, and I'm going to go bracket name / bracket name slash dot JSON, like that. And that will load our stuff. Now, much like before, we need to actually tell it to open it up in a file mode. So we'll open it up as read. And then we'll come in here and we're going to get the text. So we're going to say string content is equal to file.get as text. And that's going to pull back all of our data as text. And then we can basically just make it into an object. So we can type return JSON convert dot deserialize object, and we'll pass in content like that. It's going to be a little mad at us. If we click on our little guy here, you can see that we have an add explicit cast. So we'll go ahead and do that. And we're just going to expect that that's correct. Now, technically speaking, we probably shouldn't do it this way, but it's an easy way to handle it for right now. So we'll go with it like this for now. Now, once we have this, we basically just have to hook up our load game. Now, this is actually going to be really easy. All we have to do is go back to our game here. We can come in here into our main menu, come in here, right click, add a child node, add a button like this, and we'll say load game like that. And then we're going to rename this to load game like that. We'll come into our node, we'll go to on button down on our main menu. I'm going to hit Control A, Control C. I'm going to connect it to our main menu. I'll scroll down here and say private void on game load button down, and then we will basically call out to our utility. So we'll say save load manager dot load game. We got to pass in a name. In our case, I'm going to default it to test, and we'll actually make like a full system for this in a minute. Now, something that I should probably explain right here is basically how this works is we're loading our file, then we're coming in, we're getting the text, the content of it, and then we are actually deserializing that content into an object. So we're basically taking it and making it into an object from text, if that makes sense. And then inside of our main menu, we're loading our game, which should return a dictionary, right? So that means that since it's returning a dictionary, we can say var game data is equal to this, and then we can basically tell our game manager to load the level. So we can just copy this, paste it, and then pass in game data dot. If we take a look at our dictionary, we have load level. So we'll pass that in game data dot load level. And then we can do the same thing here. We can copy this, paste, and then do the same thing with spawn index. So we'll pass that in as well. And now it's going to say, hey, this is not a integer. So we'll actually parse an int out of that. So we'll say int dot parse. And we'll pass this guy in like this. Now, once we have this, we basically can just come into our game here. We can Control S, go into our game base, reload, and click load game. And nothing happened. You can see here we had a failure, a cast exception, it looks like. So it says here, unable to cast object Newtonsoft link object to generic dictionary. So that means that the object that we have is not a valid dictionary according to Newtonsoft. So what does that mean? Well, that means that when we do our save load manager, this object that's getting deserialized is not getting deserialized as the proper object. So instead of doing a hard cast, what we can do is we can come in here and do kind of a, I guess, a softer cast. So we can just come in here and say dictionary, bracket, bracket, string, comma, string. And in theory, that should just work. So let's come over to our game here. Let's refresh it and let's try again. And the reason why I wanted to have that fail was because I wanted you guys to see sometimes C# suggestions is not always correct. So just keep that in mind. Now we're going to click load game. We're going to hit spacebar and we are in. Awesome. So now what happens if we run over here? We open up the door. We come over here. We hit E, load our next hallway. We hit I, save, and then we stop our game. Well, if we take a look at our information inside of our horror game here, we click on this, you can see it says level 2 hallway spawn index of 1. So in theory, this should work. So now we can just come in here hit play, and then click load, hit spacebar, and there we are. Awesome. So the basis of our save load system is done. It actually works, which is amazing. So now we have two things that we need to do. We need to create a loading menu so that way we can pick different save slots. And I'm thinking that we're going to do kind of like a Baldur's Gate style. So we'll build that out next. And then we can talk about how to make a really flexible save system. And what I mean by flexible is how we save scene objects, because saving scene objects and player position and things like that, it's actually really complicated. So first, we're going to build out the loading menu, and then we'll go from there. So first things first, we're going to go up to our scene, new scene. We're going to create a user interface scene here. And we're going to name this load menu. Now with load menu, what we want to do is we want to add in a panel, add in a few elements. So if you remember our original design, we had a panel over here on the left. We had our title right here. We had a picture right here, some information right here, and then our load and back buttons right here. So let's scaffold that out. So first things first, we're going to add in a button. We're going to make it about this big, give or take. We'll move it down here like so. And I'm going to change the size of this button to be a pretty good size. We'll duplicate this button, drag it over here like this. We'll name the first button back like that. We'll name the second button load. We'll click on back. We'll go to inspector. We'll type back like that. We'll click on load. We'll type load like that. And then we're going to create this little panel here. So we'll right click, add a child node, panel, and then we'll make it about, I don't know, about yay big, give or take. Something like that should be fine. We're going to right click our panel, add in a scroll container like so. We'll right click that, add in a child node, add in a VBox container. We're going to grab our scroll container and make it full rect. That's going to make it actually expand to be the full size of this little panel. Now we can right click, add in a child node. Let's add in a button like so, and then let's add in save game 1. Now you'll notice that this doesn't fully expand all the way across. So what can we do to solve that? Well, first things first, we have to come into our VBox container, go into layout, go to container size, and for horizontal, click expand. And if we can click expand, that will make this expand all the way across. And that should basically solve this problem. Now we just need to add in our little save right here and our load game right here. So what I'll do is I'll come up here, right click, add a child node. I'm going to add in a text, rich text label. I'm going to make it about this big. I'll put it right here and I'll type saves, like so. We're going to make it about this big, give or take. I'm going to control duplicate it, and I will come up here and center align everything like this. We'll make it top center, just like that. If you want to center align this, you could just type load game like so. And then what you could do is you can go bracket, bracket, center, slash center, bracket like that. And in theory, granted, this is my first time doing this, so forgive me if it's wrong. We'll see if this works. BB code enabled. And there we go. And that will center it. And I want to thank you, Senior Super Suede, for actually telling me how to do that, because that was something that was completely confusing to me. So apparently BB code allows you to come in and actually use BB codes, which I guess hence the name BB code enabled, to actually style your text. So just keep that in mind, because it's super useful. And BB code is basically bulletin board code. It's actually really an old way of doing things. It's kind of surprising. I didn't even know this was a thing, but if you were to come in here, you can see that they have a bunch of different options. So you can actually come in and really edit your stuff. Now, something else that I've noticed is some BB codes work and some BB codes don't. So I'm going to have to play around with it and get more experience, and then I can hopefully make like a little Godot short to kind of explain this further. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to come in here and go to my theme overrides. I'm going to go into my style font size. I'm going to click check mark, and I'm going to change this to 15, maybe a bit bigger than 15. Maybe we can go with 20. We'll just kind of expand this up, something like that. A nice big font there. And I think that will do it. And then what we'll do is we'll come in and add in our image. So we'll right click, add in a child node. We're going to add in a texture rect like so. I'm going to make it nice and large, something about yay big. We'll maybe make it about here-ish. And then what I'm going to do is I'll come in, right click, add another child node. We'll add in another rich text label. We're going to make it about this big, throw it down here. And in our texture rect, just so I know where things are at, I'm going to drop an icon in so I can see what it looks like. And I'm going to drag this guy up here. I'm going to say save name. And then I'm going to control duplicate that and put save date like that. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to name this as save name. And I'm going to come in here and do save date like that. And there we go. So that's basically the overall structure we're going to go with. So once we have our structure, now we can start building out our code. And this is where things are going to get fun. So with our load menu, we need a back and a load. So we'll need to do that. So we'll right click our load menu. We'll attach a script. We're going to call it load menu.cs. And the way we're going to approach this is we're going to try to make this into a flexible menu because I want you guys to be able to use this with your other games, right? Same thing with everything else that we build. We should probably build it in a way that's flexible, a way that works for multiple games. Since this is going to be instancing buttons right here based off of however many saved games we have, that means we need to traverse our directory, right? So remember, we have these directories. If I go back to my saved games, I have a test right here, right? So I'm going to have multiple folders in here for each saved game. So what that means in practice is that we're going to traverse this directory right here and load up a button for each thing in this directory. So how do we do that? Well, that's actually relatively simple. Godot actually has a built-in system for this kind of thing. So what we can do is come in here and say dir access dirs is equal to dir access dot get directories at, and I can pass in a location. So I'll say user / saved games like that. For each var item in dirs like so, and we can say for each item in dirs, and we have some issues. So let's take a look. So you can see here, cannot implicitly convert type string to Godot dir access. So this returns an actual list of strings. I thought it would return a dir access, but it doesn't. So we'll pass in a string list right here. So string list. And then we can say for dir in dirs, we can come in here and instantiate that button. Now, we don't actually have a button to instantiate. Remember, we just built that button right here, right? So we have this little button right here. So we're going to need to save this button out and basically create a function for it. So what we can do is right click our button, attach a script, name it load button.cs. We'll come back here. We'll rename this load button. And then we'll just drag this guy down here. We'll save it as a scene. And then we will delete it like so. So what we're going to do here is we're going to actually load all of our buttons and instance them. And then basically we're going to need to set those buttons up so that they display the information that we expect. So when you click on this button, it shows this information right here. So before we can even really start building out our load menu any further, we need to make it so that we're actually saving the proper data. So I'm going to control S this. I'm going to call it load menu.tscn. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into where we save our information. So that would be in our save load manager. So that is right here. We'll come up to our save load manager and you'll see this is where we're saving our data. We need to actually save our system information when we actually save our game. So if you remember our original design, we had one side where it had our game manager information, we had our scene information, and then we had our save information. So this is when we're going to save our save information. So how do we actually save our save information? Well, thankfully, it's pretty much copy and paste from this code here. It's literally copy and paste. So what we can do is we can basically just come up here, copy this bit of code, paste it like that. And of course we have our underscores here, so we can just kind of change this information. So we can say load screen info like that. And then we could basically just copy this, paste. Instead of save JSON, we can say load screen JSON. We can just copy this guy, paste it, we'll get rid of that GD print. And here we'll just say load screen file, copy it, paste, paste. And then we could just do a underscore load screen like that. This will need to be updated, so we'll just grab this and paste, and that's going to serialize that info. And something else that we can do, instead of doing this add here, you'll see that they are kind of grayed out. If we actually hover over it and click, and then we click on this, you can see that it says collection initialization can be simplified. If we click on that, it'll actually just simplify it quite a lot. So that's something to keep in mind. You can actually just do that and it'll refactor to be a bit cleaner. Now, when we want to save our actual system information, all we have to do is save some specific bits of information. The first thing I want to save is my name. So we have a save name. If you remember in our properties here, we have save name, save date, and image. So if we come over here, we're saving our name, which is going to be name. We're saving our date. So date time, which is going to be time.getUnix time from system like that. And you'll see it's mad at us because it's not a string because it's a double. So we'll say .toString like so. And then we need to save a path to our image. So we'll hit comma, enter, bracket, bracket, quote, image path, comma, quote, $, quote, user, colon, / saved games, / bracket, bracket, name, / bracket, bracket, name dot png. Like that. And then we'll add a comma. And there we go. And pretty much that should just save our information. But now we have another problem, right? We need to take a picture of our screen. So how do we do that? Well, that's actually really easy as well. To create a screenshot, all we have to do is say var screenshot, and we'll get our viewport. So we'll say game manager dot instance dot get viewport dot get texture dot get image like that. And then we can save it as a PNG. So screenshot dot save PNG bracket quote, and we can basically just grab this exact path. So that way we're not making any mistakes on our path. And naturally I did quote, so of course it's going to do that. I should have learned from that before. And that should just save the PNG. Now, something that we may want to do is we may want to wait for the next physics frame. Game manager dot instance dot get tree dot physics frame. Now, you might think that this would work, right? Because of course, right? You're pulling back that physics frame. But unfortunately, in C#, it's a bit different. You have to await to a signal. So we're going to say game manager.instance.toSignal. And then you have to pass in your source. So engine dot get singleton quote engine comma quote physics underscore frame. Now, hopefully that will work. To be honest with you, I'm not fully sure if you could do physics frame like this. We might have to go to idle frame instead, but we always want to wait to the next frame. And the reason why is because sometimes Godot gets a little finicky and can cause problems when you do a screenshot. So I like to wait for my next physics frame just to make sure everything gets flushed and cleaned and okay. So now, hopefully, if we've done everything correctly, this should just work. We should be able to just go into our project, game base, refresh our project, hit start game, spacebar, inventory, save, and we have a crash. native interop, await, attempting to connect to non-existent signal, physics frame, to callable game manager. And what that means is basically that physics frame does not exist. So let's try using idle frame instead. And now let's see what happens. So I'm going to refresh. We have another crash. It says that it's attempting to connect to non-existent signal, idle frame. So since this doesn't seem to work, what I'm going to try to do is instead of getting our singleton engine, I'm just going to grab our tree. So game manager.instance.get tree, and I'm going to pass back and wait for, instead of an idle frame, we're going to say physics underscore frame, like so. And hopefully that will work. Now I know a lot of people probably are going to get mad about game manager.instance because you could technically make this inherit from a node and then you'd be able to just say get tree. But in order to create this as kind of like a utility, you kind of have to do it this way. Or you could get a reference to a node, I guess, and then add it to the tree and then use that reference, possibly. But I feel like this will be probably the easiest method. Now, once you have this, let's come in here. Let's hit play. Let's hit start game, spacebar, inventory, save. And I didn't see anything break. So let's go out to our saved games. So we'll click on saved games, test. Ooh, and we got a PNG. Awesome. So we'll click on that and there it is. And if we take a look at our JSON, there's our data. Awesome. I am actually kind of relieved because I figured that this wasn't going to work this easily. So I'm really happy. Now, something that you'll notice that if we look at our PNG, it's a picture of our inventory. Now, obviously, if we're in a save or a load system, then it would be a picture of our save screen or something like that. And we may not want this. We may want to hide all of our UI elements. So what can we do to kind of fix this? Well, the simplest way is if we take a look at our game here, when we have our player here, it has an inventory right here. So what I'm thinking we need to do is we need to pull this off and move it to our game base. We have a level base, we have a player base. That means that we should probably have a UI base to go with it. So if we right click our game base, add in a child node and add in a node, let's name it UI base. Like so. Let's drag our main menu underneath it. If we click on level base, I'm pretty sure the only thing that we do is just set our level base as an instance. So that should be fine. If we move our UI down to here, that's going to give us a little bit more flexibility to work with. And then we can come in and drag our inventory.tscn into here as well, and we can hide it. And then we can actually come in, go into our player, get rid of our inventory, like so, go into our player itself, scroll down, and let's find where we set up our inventory. Right here. So we have get node inventory. So what we can do, instead of just getting node inventory, we can just come in and grab our UI manager. So our UI manager is right here, right? UI base. So what we need to do is right click, attach a script, call it UI base, probably without a space bar right there, hit create. And then what we can do is do exactly the same thing that we did with our level base. So base.ready, and then instance level base is equal to this, right? So we can come in here, paste, and instead of level base, we'll just say UI base, like so. And then we'll go to our game manager here, scroll up to the top, and add that in. So public node UI base. And now any instance that we have to our UI, we could just type UI base. So now we should be able to just come in here, go to our player, and do get node inventory. And instead of doing that, we could just say game manager.instance.UI base.get node inventory. And then it should just work from this point forward, hopefully, at least. And now all we have to do is go into our UI base and hide our inventory. But I don't want to just hide our inventory object. I actually want to hide everything. So when a save happens, I just want to be able to hide and show my UI. So we'll say public void hide UI, like so. And I'll say for each var item in get children. If item is control, then we'll pass in a C to make it so that it's type control, and then we can say c.hide. Then we can do the exact same thing, but for show. So we can just copy this, enter, and then show UI like that. And it's the exact same thing, but with show. And there we go. Easy enough. And now when we do our save, we can come in and hide our UI. So we can come in here and say .instance.ui base.hide hide UI. Node does not contain definition, blah, blah, blah. I think it's because I set my node as type node instead of as type UI base like that. And that should solve that. There we go. And that should hide my UI. I should probably take my signal, duplicate it a few times, make it wait a few frames just in case there's something that's, rendering. It'll give it a second to think. And now, hopefully, if we refresh this, it might work. So we'll say, well, first things first, it doesn't have any type of background. So that's interesting. We're going to have to fix that. So we'll click start game, spacebar, and you'll see load game is there, but that's okay. We'll hit I, save, and it saved. You'll see it lost the capture of our mouse. So we'll have to look at that, but it did save. So let's take a look at our test. We'll refresh, and it doesn't seem to have worked, so that's not a good sign. Let's take a look at our save load manager. So we hide our UI, we wait a few physics frames, and then we take an image. Okay, so I think I figured it out. So what was going on was, for some reason, even when we were waiting for our physics frame, Godot didn't seem to care. So what I did instead was I did a await task delay, which in C# basically just says, hey, delay for 100 milliseconds. And that gives us enough time for Godot to kind of pass through and then continue executing this little section here. So that pretty much solves our issue. If I come in here and I get rid of this, I control S, and I come into our game here and I refresh, and then I hit start game, I hit I, save, alt tab out, project, open user data folder, and then I go into saved games test PNG. You can see that we now have a good save picture of our game. And if we take a look at our test load scene JSON, you can see it has all of our data as expected. So everything's working. We just needed to get this PNG to get written. So now all we have to do is whenever we click on this button, it's going to populate this information. And when we load our load menu, it's going to actually fire off and show all of these buttons here. So what I'm going to do is right click, attach a script, and I'm going to type load button. Now our load button is going to be set up relatively simple. For the most part, all it's going to do is just house information about our button. And it's going to fire off an event that basically just says, hey, I've been clicked. So first things first, it's going to hold our save name. So save name, public, date, time, date, public, string, image path, and then I'm going to actually set up my button. So I need a function basically to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type public void set up button like that. I'm going to pass in a dictionary of information. So dictionary of type string, comma, string, because that's what we actually set it up to be. And we'll call that data. And now we're basically going to set our object information. So we'll say save name is going to be equal to data dot bracket quote. And I believe we used save name or probably name. Actually, I think it's name. Let me see. It is name. So we'll use name with a lowercase n. And then we'll duplicate that a few times and we'll set this to date, image path, and then we'll change this to, I believe we have date next. So date time. And we'll need to parse that into a date time. So we'll say datetime dot parse, and we'll drop this guy in like this. And this might not work now that I'm thinking about it because we're saving it using the Godot system. So actually, I think what we should do is we should do time dot. Let me see if time dot get date time string from Unix time like this. That's probably going to return a string is going to be my guess. And it does. So I'm going to set this to a string instead, just for consistency. Now you'll see that we have an error here that says cannot convert string to long. So we'll just come in here and we'll type long.parse, and we'll just parse this as a long. And then, much like most buttons in Godot, we're going to need to actually override our on button down. So we'll just come back to Godot here. We're going to right click, save branch as scene, and we'll say load button.tscn. We're going to go into that. We're going to rename this as load button. We'll come over here to our node button down. We're going to copy this, connect it, and then paste it into here like this. So we'll say public void paste bracket bracket, and we're going to need to basically inform the rest of Godot that this button has been pressed. So we'll come up here, bracket bracket signal like that, and then we'll say public delegate void load button down event handler like that, and then we're going to pass in a string, and we're going to call that name comma string. We're going to call that date string, and we're going to call that image path like that. And that's basically going to create a signal for us to be able to basically use. So now we can come in here and we can basically fire off that signal. So emit signal parentheses signal name dot load button down like that. And that will basically emit that signal. Now, if I want to pass in arguments to go with that, I can actually pass them in just by passing them in as if it's a array of objects. So I can go bracket bracket, save name, comma, date, comma, image path like that. And as long as we follow the same stuff, it should be good. Now, you might need to pass in a new. So it looks like I don't need to do an array. I think I can just get away with doing this. There we go. And once we have this, basically what we did is we created a signal, right, that it now exists inside of Godot. Now we should probably do a capital L. I'm thinking that's probably a better route. So I'll update that to capital L. But basically we created a load button down event handler, which basically registers it with Godot and C# as kind of like a signal that can be fired off. And then we emitted our signal down here on button down. Now I realize that you could just hook up to the on button down here and then do an override to basically make it work. But this is a little bit cleaner and a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to go with this method just because it's a little bit simpler. I just noticed a bug right here where I have my image path as name, and it's actually supposed to be image path, img path. So we'll update that real quick. Now we just got to spawn this button. And that's actually going to be relatively easy. So if we head back to our loading menu here, so now we're recursing all the way back up to our loading menu at this point, we can basically on ready directory parse our save directory right here, pull back its saved information, and then show that button. So the best way to do that is on ready, we're going to say var dir is equal to dir access dot get directories at, and we'll parenthesis quote user colon / saved games like that. And you can see that this returns a string array. So we'll change this to a string array. And the reason why I did var at first is because I couldn't quite remember if it was going to be a string array or if it was going to be a like a dictionary or something like that. So I just wanted to make sure. And then what I'm going to do is say for each var dir in, and in terms of collections, I'm going to rename this to dirs. So that way I have some kind of unified name here. So first we need to actually instance our button here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export out a packed scene so we have something to instance. So we'll put bracket bracket export, and then we'll say private packed scene load button. Then we'll come over here and we'll say load button dot instantiate like that as a load button. And we will actually make that equal to a load button. So load button is equal to load button instantiate. And what we'll do is we'll actually connect a signal. So we'll say button dot load button down plus equals. And what I'll do is I'm going to create a function. So on load button down like that. I will click on this guy, click right here, and generate that method. And that's going to actually build out the method for me automatically. And then we have to load our actual save game information. So what we can do is we can actually go into our save load manager. We can come to where we do our load game, and we can basically just copy this information here. So we'll just basically copy this. We'll come into our load menu. We'll paste that like so. And then we can basically change this from name to dir, and then we can do underscore. And I believe we chose load screen.json as our name. You can see right here we have test underscore load screen.json. And then we'll have a string content is equal to file.get as text. And then we're doing a JSON convert. We can actually quick fix that and just use newtonsoft.json. And then we need to also do the same thing here. So we'll click this, use system collections.generic to bring back our dictionary. And instead of doing a return here, once we load our content, we need to set up our button. So we'll say button.setup button, which it looks like I spelled setup button wrong. So let me go out to that real quick and fix it. So we'll head over to our load button, set up button like that. And then we'll go back to our load menu, set up button. And we need to pass in our data. So we'll pass in our dictionary. And that means that this is going to need to be an object. So we'll make it a dictionary string like so. Make that equal to data. And we'll pass in our data like that. And then we'll say button.text is equal to data bracket bracket. And I believe it's called name like that. And then from here, we should have our button pretty much set up. So we're going to need to add it as a child to something. And if we take a look at our scene real quick right here, and we go back to our load menu right here, you'll see we have a VBox container. So it goes, if we bring this over, we can type get node bracket VBox container quote panel slash scroll container slash VBox container dot add child, and we're going to go ahead and add our button just like that. So basically what we're doing is for each directory in our saved games folder, we're going to make a button for it, and we're going to load that information here. And then we are going to get all of that stuff. We're going to set up the button, and then we are going to go in and set up our name and then add that as a child. Now, when we click that button, what are we going to do? Well, when you click that button, you need to basically set these rich text labels, save name, save date, and text direct as the proper information. So thankfully that's relatively simple. So we'll say get node bracket rich text label like that. And we'll just pass in save name like that. Dot text is equal to name. We'll copy, paste, and we'll do, instead of save name, we'll do save date like that. Dot text is equal to date. And then finally, for our image path, we don't necessarily want to do this. We actually should get our text direct, and we'll need to pass in our text direct as well. So I'll just copy, paste. Dot texture is equal to, and we'll need to pass in a texture. Now, unfortunately, we're going to need to probably load our texture manually. So let's create a function for that. So we'll say load image texture, and I'm going to pass in the image path. Now, we don't actually have this function. So if I click this, I could just generate that method right here. I can come down here and I can basically build this out. So first things first, when you want to load an image texture, you need to actually come in and create an image first. So we'll say var loaded image, new image, like that. We can come in here and basically just load that image. So we'll say var error is equal to loaded image dot load, and we'll need to pass in our path. So image path, like that. If error does not equal okay, then we can just gd.print error loading image, and we'll go ahead and return null. But if we don't have an error, we can return our image texture dot create from image, and we can pass in our loaded image, and that will actually create a texture from that image. So basically how this works is what it does is it creates a new image. It goes and fetches that image and loads it into memory, and then we convert that image to a texture so that we can set it right up here. And that's basically how it works. Now, in theory, we should be able to come in here, hit play on the loaded menu, and it should show one button. Unfortunately, it doesn't, so that means something's wrong. So if you can see here, object reference not set to an instance of an object. So what that means is that our loaded menu here has not been set up with the loaded button right here. So if we head down here like that and add it, now if we refresh, in theory, it should work. So we'll hit run, and it still broke. So let's take a look and see what it's doing. System read only input string was not in correct format. You really can't see it because my ultra wide is causing problems. But basically what this is saying is that the system format input string was not in the correct format for what Godot was looking for. So if we take a look, you can see that it was on load button 16. And that's where here it's trying to parse along, but for some reason, the date time that we have, it's not happy about it. So the question is it the way that we're serializing the data? Is it a float? Is it a long? What is it? So let's close all of this real quick. I'm just going to close everything. I'm going to reopen this guy up so we have this. So we're looking at this section here. So it turns out Godot is kind of a funky boy. So this unfortunately is not going to work. The decimal value that we have here is the number of seconds from Unix epoch. So we're going to have to do a little bit of manual calculation, which I actually did not expect. So what we'll do is we'll type new date time quote 1970, comma 1, comma 1, comma 0, comma 0, comma 0, comma date time kind dot UTC dot add seconds, and then we'll pass in our data. So we'll go double dot parse data bracket bracket date time, and then we'll dot to string that entire spiel right there. And basically the reason why is because if you come over here to your save load manager and you take a look at it, when we're saving our data, we're coming right here, get Unix time from system, returns current Unix timestamp in seconds based on timestamp in UTC. This method is implemented by the operating systems and always returns a time in UTC. So what that means is that it's using a Unix timestamp, which means it's from epoch, and it's seconds based. So what I did was I set up a thing right here that basically just says Unix epoch, which is 1970-11000, and I said that the date was a UTC date stamp. And then I added the number of seconds because in our save manager here, it says that it is the timestamp in seconds based on system time in UTC. So I added my seconds after I parsed my double. And the reason why I used double was because if you look at this, this says it returns a double. So that's basically how I came to the realization that this was the proper way to do it. So now if we hit play, in theory, if I click right here, there we go. It says test and 10:28, which is today, 2023 at 10:29 p.m., which I think might be the wrong time because currently it is 8:59 p.m. So we might be wrong here. So let's take a look. And if we take a look at this, you'll see that this is a UTC time, which means we need to do a .2 local time. So that way we can tell everything that this is a local time instead of just a UTC time, because UTC for me is 3 hours later than what mine is, which is Eastern time zone. So now if I hit play, in theory, this should be the correct time, which is about 8 o'clock or so. So I'll click on test. You'll see test 10/28/2023 at 8 p.m. at 8:57 p.m. Now you'll notice that our image is a little bit on the large side, so let's fix that real quick. So if we click on this guy, change this to, let's go with fit width proportional, or maybe fit width. I don't really know if that made that big of a difference. So let's go with fit height proportional. That seems to be a problem. So we'll say keep size. Nope. Ignore size. That's closer. I think it might be making it fat though. If we do stretch mode as keep, what does that do? Nope. Keep aspect. There we go. That's a lot better. That's what we're looking for. So we're looking for probably either fit width or keep aspect, and that will basically make our image show up as we expect. So now we have the ability to have our image like this. So now we need to actually create our different save slots. And the easiest way to do that is to actually save our data with our date time attached to it. So how do we do that? Well, the simplest way is to go in here, and when we do our save load manager, and if I'm going to break that back up so it's full, when we save our information here, we save our game right here as just name. So if we head up to where we run save game, which is pretty much just our inventory section here, we can basically tell this to have our date time attached to it. So we could pass in save game test, we'll hit plus, and then we'll come in and say time dot get date time string from system, like that. And actually, before we do that, we should probably do a string date is equal to this dot to string, like that. And then what we should probably do is just do date equal date dot replace quote colon equal to a pointer equal to a dash. And then I'm going to duplicate that and get rid of any slashes and do the same thing. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want this to have a problem necessarily. So I'm just going to do it this way, and then I'll just pass in my date like that. And that should make things a little bit cleaner. And plus then we're using the Godot built-in stuff. So now if we head over here and we hit play, we click save, you'll notice that nothing really has changed. So if we head over to our saved games, you'll see that we have a test with our date in there. And then we have all of our information with our date in there as well. So that means that if we hit load menu and we hit refresh, we should have 3 buttons. Our initial button for test, and then our test button right here as well. You'll notice that there is a very minute difference between these two. But if we want to make sure and we want to prove it to ourselves, we can hit play and we can run forward. Once we get into our level 1 wake up, I can hit I, save game, close, and then go into our load menu, hit the play icon, click on the last one, and you'll see that we have different icons and different images for each save, which is awesome. So I'm going to get rid of this button here. So we'll come in here and we'll get rid of that button because we don't need it to be here, because that's just adding an additional button that's unnecessary to our project. Something else that we should probably set up is we should probably set up our load and our back buttons so that way they work. And it's actually going to be relatively easy. All we have to do is just hook up the buttons. So we'll do button down. We'll say on back button down. That's fine. We'll come down here. public on back button down, void on back button down, like that. And then we need to do the other one, which is our load button on load button down. So we'll load this guy up like that. And when we smack this load button, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to tell our game to load. And the way we're going to do that is we're basically going to first save game load our game. So we'll say var obj is equal to dot load game, and then we'll pass in the string of the name of the thing that we want to load. Now, in our case, we don't actually have that information. So in order to get that information, we need to set it as a public variable up here, or at least as a class variable. So we'll say private string save to load, like that. We'll come down here to when we set our button down, and we'll just say save to load is equal to name, like that. And that will actually allow us to pass in save to load right here so we can load our data. And that's going to return back a dictionary of string. And then we can just type game manager dot instance dot load level, and we can pass in our data from here. So obj dot bracket, and I believe we used, if I remember correctly, because I have a memory of a goldfish, loaded level as our name. So I'll pull this guy over, loaded level, comma, obj, bracket, quote, and we'll grab our spawn index to go with that. There we go. Awesome. And I typed loaded level instead of load level. So we'll do that. And it's looking for an integer, not a string. So we'll say int.parse parentheses, like that. And then what I'm going to do is, in order for this to be a bit more of a flexible system, I'm going to create some signals to kind of help make this into a proper system. So first things first, I'll come up here, I'll create two signals. We'll come up here, signal, and we'll say public delegate, loading level, event. I believe we have to use event handler, like that. And we need to choose the return type. So we'll say void loading level event handler. And then we can come down here and we can basically emit that signal. So we'll say emit signal name dot loading level. And that will basically emit out that signal saying, hey, we are loading our level. And then I'm going to queue free as well. And that's basically just going to kill this interface. So that way we don't have it constantly sitting in memory. And when we click the back button, let's just queue free, like that. And that will just kill this when we go back. And I think that should do it for this scene here. So now in theory, if we go back to our scene here, we hit Control S. We go into our game base. We can click on our main menu and we can click on load game. And we have a button that's emitted right here. So we're going to need to actually instance our stuff when we click on load game button. So what I'm going to do, so I'll come up here, I'll hit public packed scene load menu, like that. Put bracket, export. Then we'll come down here and we'll just say load menu dot instantiate, and we'll choose our type as load menu. And then we'll just add child load menu dot instantiate. And there we go. Now, if we take a look at our object here, or at our scene here, you'll see that our main menu will add our stuff here. So what I'm thinking, now that I'm thinking about it, let's make our UI manager handle this. So we'll say game manager.ui.instance.ui base.add child. That way it holds onto that base. And then we can just hide ourselves. And then what we also can do is and then I'm going to come in here, and when the back button is pressed, I'm just going to hide the main menu. So I'm going to type hide like that, and that will hide this menu. Now we should be able to just go back to our main menu, which is right here. We'll click on our main menu, go into, come over here, and then add in our load menu. So we'll just drag that guy in like so. We'll hide it. We'll click on our main menu, open up our script. We'll come down here to our load game button. We'll type get node bracket control, and we'll type load menu dot show. When a game gets loaded, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we queue free our main menu, right? We don't want that to be shown to our user after they've selected that they want to load their game. So much like how we do this start game on button down, we kind of just start our game and then hide. We kind of need to do the same thing, right? So we need to queue free here like this, and we need to hook up our signal here where we have our load level event handler. We need to hook this signal up to our actual main menu so that it queues free when a load happens. So we can come in here and we can basically just get our load menu right here. We can make this a type load menu like that. We'll hit dot loading level plus equals on loading level, and then we will right click, we'll click on it, click on this guy, generate a method, so that way we now have something, and then we will queue free like that. And that'll basically get rid of our main menu when we are loading our level. And now hopefully all we have to do is come in here, hit Control S, go into our game base, hit play, and if we're lucky, everything will work just fine. So now we can click load game. It pops up this. We can select which game we want. We'll click load, hit the space bar, and our game has loaded. Awesome. So now we have save slots. We have a load game. Now we need to have the ability to save and load from inside of our actual project here. And that's where we're going to create a pause menu to kind of build this out. Now, a pause menu is actually going to be really easy because basically all we have to do is just create a small menu, bind it to our escape key, and then basically hook up our save and load buttons. So it should be relatively quick. So to create a pause menu, it's going to be relatively simple. We'll go into our scene. We're going to create a new scene. We're going to create a user interface. We're going to right click, add in a child node. We'll add in a button like so. Add in a VBox container. We're going to drag that VBox container to be, I don't know, about this big, give or take on the screen. And I'm going to center align that. So that way now it's center on my screen. I'm going to right click, add in another child node. I'm going to add in a button and I'm going to duplicate that. I want to say 4 times. And we're going to have the first button be continue. We're going to have the words say continue. We're going to click the second one. We're going to say save, and we'll type save. Next one, load. The next one will be options, and I'm not going to actually build out the options menu, but I will get to that in the next one or in a future one. And exit. And I'll copy that and I'll paste that. And now we're going to need a script specifically for our pause menu. So we'll add that in, and I'm going to rename this to pause menu so that we have some kind of pause menu here. I'm going to hit Control S, save. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook all of these guys up to my pause menu. So I'll click node on button down. We'll copy this, connect. We'll say public void paste bracket bracket. There we go. We'll come over here. We'll do the same thing. Connect, Control A, Control C. It's going to open this guy up. Public void bracket bracket. We'll come down here, do load. Unfortunately, it's a lot of grind work for this to work. We'll do the same thing with our options button and our exit button. Now, the only ones that I want to hook up right now is our continue, our save, our load, and our exit, because the rest of them, which is basically just the options, is going to require its own tutorial in its own. Now, underneath our load button, all I'm going to do is just do get node, load menu, and I'm just going to name it load menu dot show, like that. And for save, all I'm going to do is basically just run a very basic save, which we already have in our inventory. So we'll just grab that code. So we'll scroll down to the bottom and pull that save code right here. We'll just copy that, go to our pause menu here. Under save, we'll just paste that guy right there. For continue, all we'll do is we'll unpause the game, but of course we don't have that capability just yet. And then on exit, we'll say get tree dot quit, and that will kill the game. For on load, what we'll do is we'll come into our project here and we'll basically just grab our load menu.tscn, drag that in, and we'll hide it. Simple enough. We'll save it, and pretty much it's hooked up. It's pretty much that easy. Now I'm going to drag this guy down so that way it's a little bit better, and I'm going to actually add in a rich text label, and I'm going to drag it to the center like so. We'll pull this guy out, this center align, and pull it up real quick because I forgot. I should probably tell them that it's paused. And we'll center align it, bracket, bracket, center, and we'll turn on BB code enabled, and that will center it for our stuff. Now come down to our theme overrides, go to font size, normal font size, change this to something like 20 or maybe 30. There we go. And that's basically just our paused label here. And I'll make it a little bit bigger. And there we go. So for our continue button, that's where things are going to get a little weird. So we need to be able to tell everybody that we're paused. Now you could just do a get tree and then just kill the working tree and basically just say, hey, working tree, pause. And while that is doable and while that does work, it's not my favorite way to approach it. I know that that's kind of the Godot official way, and you guys can do it that way if you want, but when I do pausing in my games, I like to create a game manager function specifically for that. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go into my game manager, which is right here, and I'll scroll down and I'll create two functions. So my first one is going to be a public void pause game. And I'm going to pass in a Boolean paused like this. And then I'm going to set a global value that says, hey, I'm paused. Now, in my case, I actually have one. It's called paused. Now, if you don't have one, go ahead and create one up at the top and just make a Boolean so that way you have something global that you can reference. So we'll say paused is equal to paused, and then we'll say if paused, then if we are paused, then we want our input mouse mode equal to visible. Else we know that then we're not paused. And if we're not paused, then we're going to want our input.mouse mode equal to captured, because that's going to capture our mouse. And we should probably inform our UI manager that, hey, we're paused. So I'm going to go UI base dot pause, and I'm going to pass in paused like so. Now you might be thinking, hold on, well, we don't have a UI base dot paused, right? That function doesn't quite exist yet. So if we head over to our UI base, we can basically just add that in. So we'll come down here and we'll say public void pause like that, and we'll pass in a Boolean of paused like so. Now, if we are paused and our UI manager, our UI base is paused, then we know that we need to instantiate our pause menu. So if paused, then let's instantiate that paused menu. And that means that if we're going to be instantiating a paused menu, then that means that we need to have a reference to that object. So we'll come up here, we'll export out a packed scene. So public packed scene, pause menu. And that's basically going to allow us to have a scene that we can instance. And since we have to create a pause menu, that means that when we get rid of our pause, we need to destroy that pause menu. So that means we need to come in here and also have a current pause menu. So we'll say pause menu like that. Well, actually, we should probably call this current pause menu. So that way we know which one we have up. So if we are paused, then we know that we need to instantiate a paused menu. So we'll say current pause menu is equal to pause menu dot instantiate like that. And we'll need to cast it as a pause menu. And then we'll need to add a child, current pause menu. Else, if we're not paused, then we know that we can destroy that pause menu, but we don't necessarily want to destroy it if it doesn't exist. So we'll say if current pause menu does not equal null, then we can go ahead and destroy that menu. Because sometimes we might get into a state where that pause menu might not exist, so we want to make sure that we check for that. So we'll queue free that, and then we should be good to go. So if we look at our game manager, you can see we have our pause, so that's good. So that'll make our pause menu show up and hide when we are paused. Now we just need to tell the game manager that we're paused. So how do we do that? Well, in our character code, we do all of our keyboard interactions. So if we head to our script player, we take a look at that, we have an input mode somewhere built into here. And I believe it is under get input. So you can see here, we have a bunch of things. So you can see we have our inventory. So what we can do is we could just create an input action. So if input.isAction just pressed, and we will say pause, then we will go ahead and pause our game. So we'll say game manager.instance.pause game, not game manager.instance.paused. And what that's going to do is that's going to pass in our pause boolean and basically flip it. So if we are paused, it's going to unpause it. And if we are not paused, then it will pause it. And that's basically how that's going to work. Now we're going to need to create that input action. So we'll come back to Godot here. We'll go to project settings. I'll pull this guy over here for you. And we'll say pause. And if I take a look at this real quick, it is called pause. Okay. So pause, we'll add it. We'll click the plus icon, escape, hit OK, hit close, Control S on the pause menu, go out to our game base, refresh it, hit start game, escape, and nothing. We have an error, so that's good. System null, object reference not set to an instance of an object, which it's a very common mistake on my part. If we click on UI base, you'll see our pause menu is empty. So let's add that in like that. Let's refresh it. And let's try this again. So we'll hit start game, escape. There's our pause menu, hit continue, and nothing happens. And my guess is because our continue, we go to our pause menu here. We take a look at our code. Our continue is set to not work. So we'll say game manager.instance.pause game, and we'll say false because we know that it's not going to be paused. So we understand that we are guaranteed that it's not going to be paused. So we can go ahead and set that to false. Now we also want to set the game to be not paused when we load our game as well. So we need to make sure that in our load menu, we do the same thing. So you can see here on load button down, let's fire off game manager instance pause game is equal to false. So that way we know that the game is not paused when that happens. Come over to our game base, hit play, start our game, hit spacebar, escape, continue. We can continue playing our game, escape, save, and it should save. Although we did lose our ability, you can see, to play our game. Now, the reason why is because when you save, you're paused. So the game doesn't recognize that you're unpaused. So we have to go into here and we need to actually set it to be unpaused. So we'll come to here. You can see that we have our continue instance on save button down. Once all of our saving is done, we will unpause our game. Now, something else that we need to make sure that we are aware of, and something I completely forgot to inform you guys about, is inside of our player, a while back in, I believe, our load system, we set up a pause system built in as well. So you can see in our physics process, if not paused, then do this. And same thing with our input for our camera. If you come down here under get input, there should be a under input here, if not paused, then do this. So that's basically why the game pauses, is because I'm basically checking if Game Manager says it's paused, then go ahead and pause it. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, that should fix that problem. So we should be good there. If we hit play, we hit start game. We hit escape, we click load, we click on our test. You can see there's the one that we just did. We can click load and we're in the game. Easy enough. We can click on options, it does nothing. We click on exit and it exits out of our game. Awesome. So now the last thing that we have to do, which at this point, I think the tutorial is probably over 2 hours long, we're going to make this into a flexible system. And this is where some of the fun kind of begins. Now, for us to make this flexible, what we need to do is we need to actually set up a system that looks through our tree, decides what saves, and then save that object. So the way we're going to do it is let's head over to our level 1 wake up, which I believe is under levels, which again, I'm going to need to organize this project, but we'll go here, level 1 wake up. Right here, we have an object that we throw right here, right? And this is a type throwable object. If I remember correctly, if we click on this, you can see it is considered a pick-upable. And you can see how it inherits from rigid body and interactable. And much like how we handle our interactables, let's just handle it the exact same way. So we'll actually create a interface that this can inherit from to say that this is a savable object. So let's basically do that. So we'll come in here, we'll click the plus icon under scripts. So that way it actually comes as a part of our scripts. We'll hit the plus icon and we'll call it savable like that, .cs. And for us to make an interface, we'll say public interface savable. And what our savable interface is going to have is going to have two functions, public void save like that, and public void load like that. And the nice thing about this is once we make an interface, we can basically interact with it generically. And what I mean by that is if we click on pick-upable and we go comma savable like that, you'll see that this little bubble pops up here, this little light bulb. If you click on it, you can say implement interface. So what did that do? Well, if we scroll down, you'll see that we have a save and a load function right here. So it just implemented that stuff so that we can use it. So how are we going to save our interactable object? Well, the way we're going to do it is we're just going to make a small dictionary that kind of houses that information. So what we'll do is we'll just return new dictionary string comma string like that. And we'll put bracket bracket like that. And then we'll do a semicolon just like that. Now you're going to see, hold on a minute, we cannot use a void when we do our save. And that's because that's my mistake. We're going to change this to a dictionary of string comma string like that. And then I'm just going to grab this, copy it, go into our pick-upable and change that to a dictionary. Now, when we do our return, we're just basically going to put in what we want to save. So for instance, we're going to want to save the name of the object. And in my case, I'm going to use get path to pull back that name. And that's basically like a unique path to that object. So think of it kind of like from where root is located in your tree. That's what this is. And I'll show you what that looks like once we do our first save. So we'll say name, and then we're going to save our position. So quote position, comma, and we'll do a global position. Now, you'll notice that we have a underline here. It says, hey, you cannot convert Godot vector 3 to string, right? So what can we do? What we can do is we can just hit gd.var to str and pass in this object. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, hold on a minute. Why not just have an object here that we can basically serialize and then deserialize? And you're correct. Technically, that is a better way, but this way is a little bit less work and has generally the same amount of flexibility. So that's the reason why I'm not creating some kind of variant, or I'm not going through and creating an object for this thing to save. Then we're going to hit comma, bracket, bracket, and we will also save our global rotation this way. So we'll hit rotation, comma, and gd.var to str, and we'll pass in our rotation degrees just like that. And that's going to be what we save. Now, when we load, we're going to do the exact same thing. So our load is going to take in a dictionary of string. So we'll pass that in. We'll call it data. And then we'll just copy this guy. We'll go up to our savable and we'll do the same thing. Load right here. So that way it has the data loaded as we would expect. And we'll come in here and we'll basically just load our data. So we're going to do the exact same thing, but the exact opposite. So we'll say global position is equal to strgd.str to var bracket parentheses data dot bracket bracket position. And we'll make sure that this matches like that. And you'll see that it has a line underneath it, and that means that we have to cast it as a vector 3. So you see vector 3 like that. And that'll basically tell it to be a vector 3 so that it doesn't get upset and it knows that it's the correct type that it needs to be. Then we can paste this and do a vector 3, and we'll just grab our rotation like so, and we'll grab our global rotation degrees just like that. And then we have to set up some way for us to basically load and save this data. Now, thankfully, it should be relatively easy. So since our pickupable object, so this guy here is basically exists in the scene, what we can do is we can come into our node and into our group, and we can add it to a group. And I'm going to add it to the saveable group. So basically, if you're in the saveable group, we are going to go and store your position and rotation. Now, what does that mean? So when we go out to our save, we're basically going to put out a file that saves this data for our project. And how we'll approach that is if we head into our code here, and we head over to our save load manager here, and we go to where we save our data, which is right here in our save game. If you come down here, what we'll do is we'll say for each var item in game manager.instance.getTree.getNodes in group, and we pass in our savable group. Basically, that's going to allow us to loop through those items. Now, when we loop through our items, all we have to do is call their save functions. So first we have to check if they are of type savable. If they actually have this interface, then we know that we can save. So we'll say if item is saveable like that, and we'll say s bracket bracket, we can say s.save like that. Now this is going to return a dictionary. And since this is returning a dictionary, we need to create kind of an object to save all of our information. So kind of like up here, we did a dictionary of load screen info. We're going to do the same thing here. So we'll say dictionary string, comma, savable, scene items to save. And then we can just say scene items to save dot add, and we can add our savable object here. And when we add our stuff, it's going to return. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's not going to be a savable. It's going to be a dictionary of string comma string, because we actually are returning a dictionary string comma string right here, right? So you can see if we hover over this, it says dictionary string comma string. So it's going to be a string comma dictionary of strings. And then for our add, what we can do is say item.path comma save, like that. Now it's going to get mad, use of unassigned local variable. That's because we need to initialize it beforehand. So we can say equal to new dictionary, like that. And that'll basically initialize this so that way it doesn't crash on us when it's running through. And then all we have to do is basically do what we did before. So basically all of this information, I believe it's right here. We can basically just copy this bit here. We can basically just paste it, and we can say scene items to save JSON. We can come in here, copy it, and paste it right here. We can change this load screen file to scene items file, like this. We can copy this guy, paste and paste. And then right here, we can just change this from load screen to scene items.json as file mode write. And now basically it's done. So since it's pretty much done, let's test it. So we'll head over to our game here. We're going to Control S to save it. Go to our base game, refresh, or hit play. Start game, spacebar. We're in our level. We're going to pick up our object, and then we're going to throw it like that. I'm going to hit escape, save, tab, alt tab out. I'm going to open up my user data folder, and we're going to see if it worked. So we'll come over here, saved games. It's going to be the last one, scene items.json. So let's take a look at that. Let's see if it actually has any data in it. So we'll come back here. We'll open it up right here. We'll drag this guy in, Control Shift P, format document. And well, it didn't save the information as expected. So that's not great, but that's fine. So it looks like it's saving the wrong object. So let's take a look at our object and let's see what it's saving. So if we go to our save load manager, you'll see that it's serializing an object. It's serializing our load screen info instead of our scene items to save. So we'll do that real quick. And now let's try that again. So we'll head back out to Godot real quick. We'll refresh it, because unfortunately with C# you have to rebuild. We'll hit start, space, pick up this object. We're going to throw it like so. It was not as good of a throw as last time, but we'll save it. We'll come back here. We'll go over to our stuff. We'll go to our saved games. We'll click. We have our scene items.json. So let's go ahead and bring that in like so. And if we format it, you'll see that we have our information as expected. So awesome, right? That's pretty much how we save our data. And the nice thing is if we duplicate this information, so if we come into our game base here, we go into our level 1 wake up. If we just duplicate this object, so just duplicate it, we'll drag it over here, let's say. So let's say we have two of these guys. One's here, right? If I just Control S, go to my game base, refresh it, start game, spacebar, you'll see we have two of them. I can pick up one of them, I can throw it. I can pick up the other one and I can throw it like that. And I can hit escape, save, alt tab, open this guy up, come in here, double click on this, double click on my scene items, Control Shift P, format it, and I have the two object, my grabbable object and my grabbable object 2. So that's literally all we need to do. It just handles it for us, which is awesome. So now how would we expand this, right? So what I mean by expanding it is if we take a look at this, we're only saving our interactable objects, right? So how do we actually store stuff like our player location? Well, that's really easy. You just close this guy, go over to where our character.cs or possibly player.cs. There it is. So we can go to our player.cs. We can scroll up to the top and make it inherit from savable. And as soon as we make it inherit from savable, we're going to get that red underline, right? So we can quick fix, implement interface. Then we can scroll down and there's our interface to implement. And from here, we basically can just type return and return a new dictionary string like that. And we can basically just set it up. Now, in our case, there's not a whole lot I want to save. I just want to save my player's location. So we can basically just go to our pickupable right here, and we can basically just copy these guys and paste them because they're basically what I wanted anyway. So I'll just throw those in there. And then we can also come in and just put our crouch state as well. So we'll just say crouched like that. And we'll bring back is crouched like that. And then if we want, we can come in here and say is crouched is equal to bool, and then grab this bit of information here, copy, paste, grab crouched and paste. And there we go. And that's basically how we can add saving and loading for our player. All we need to do now is just basically go in here, go to our player scene, and then we can just come in here, click on this guy, add it to a saveable like that, and then hit Control S. And now if we play our game, we can hit save, start, we can move our player, escape, save, Alt tab out, come back here, go here, double click on this guy, grab our scene items, Control Shift P and format, and then there you go. Root player base player, and there's its information. And it's really that easy. So now the question is, okay, we have saving. So how do we load our information? Well, thankfully, that's going to be really easy. Something that we have to take a look at is if we go into Draw.io here and we take a look at how we have our load system structured, right? So we select our scene to load, we load our scene info, we go to our game manager, which loads our scene, we load our player in. We said we were going to load our player info and move our player. Then we were going to load and apply scene info. So we're basically going to follow this. We don't want to load our player information before we get into our scene because we can't move around objects in our scene until we have our scene loaded because the objects may or may not exist. So what we can do is find our game manager, which I believe is going to be right here. We can basically come up to the top and add in a Boolean that says, hey, are we loading? So public bool loading from save. And then we can basically just have our scene manager handle that. So if we go to our scene manager, which in this case, each level has its own scene manager, right? So we have level 1 wake up, and then I believe we have a level 2 hallway as well, right? Because this is where all of our events and all of that gets handled. So we can come in here and just say public override void underscore ready like that. And then we could just check if our game manager dot instance dot loading from save. And if it is loading from save, then we know that we need to load our own level data. So we can basically come down here and just create a function for that. So public void load level data. And then we can just come up here, make sure that we add that function in right here. We can come down here and basically process our load. Now, how are we going to load our level data? Well, that's going to have to get handled by our save load manager because our save load manager basically loads and saves everything. So we're going to minimize this guy, minimize this guy. I'm going to hit enter, enter. Public static dictionary, probably string comma string would be my guess. Load scene data, and I'm going to come in here and I'm basically going to do the exact same thing that my load game does. So I'll basically just copy this, paste it, and I'm going to come in here and just say, okay, so we have our name, right, which we're not passing in. We have our return content, and then we have our JSON. When we save our user scene information, if you come down here, you can see that we use the scene items.json. So we'll pass that in, but we're going to need to figure out a way to pass in our name. And the simplest way that we can do that is by making it a global value or a class value. Private string loaded game name And we can basically just pass that in right here like that. Now you see that it looks like we can't do instance methods in a static. So we'll put private static loaded game name, and then we'll basically just have it load our data and return it. So simple enough. Now that means that since we have this loaded game name, that means that we need to actually set that somewhere. So we'll say loaded game name is equal to name. And if we're loading our game, we can just tell our game manager dot instance dot loading from save, and we can set that to true. And that should hopefully do it for our save load manager. Now all we have to do is go into our level 1 wake up and basically call that code. So all we should have to do is say dictionary string comma string level data is equal to save load manager dot load scene data. And then we should be able to get our nodes in our group, much like how we did our saving. So we should be able to say for each var item in get tree dot get nodes in group quote savable. If item is saveable, s bracket bracket, if level data dot contains key item dot get path, then we can basically load our data. So we'll say level data bracket bracket item dot get path, which will return our data, and then we can basically load our data. So s dot load and pass in that information. And now it's going to get mad at us because it says cannot convert string to system collection string. And that's because this is initialized incorrectly. So we should actually do, instead of string, we should do dictionary string comma string. Because if we take a look at, if we go back to our save load manager, this is my fault. You can see here, we are actually, when we save our data, we're actually saving it as a dictionary string with a dictionary string inside of it. So technically we're supposed to return a dictionary string with a dictionary string. And then we can deserialize that data as that proper data set as well. And then we can come in here and do dictionary string bracket like that, load scene data, get path, load, that should work. And we can put a semicolon like that. Now, hopefully this will work. And if it does, then we're going to have a good day. Once this is done loading, we can tell our game manager that we are no longer loading from save. And that'll basically just set that to say, hey, if we're done loading from save, we're done loading from save. So that way we're not going to our next level and having it attempt to load from save again. We just load from save that one time. Now, of course, if you're going to expand this to save the instance of each room as you go through them, that's a total different story, and you'll want to save and load on enter and exit of rooms. And we could talk about that if you guys want to, but at this point, I think this tutorial is like 3 hours long, so we'll burn that bridge on another day. But hopefully, if we come into our project here, we can go to our game base, refresh it, start our game, hit escape, load our last instance, load. And it did nothing. So that's not a great sign, but let's see why. So if we take a look at our stuff here, let's go into our saved games. Let's go and delete all of these saved games like that. And this should have our scene items. This should have our load screen, and we should be good. So we'll hit play, load, click, load. And you'll notice that nothing happened. So that's not ideal. So what's going on here? Well, let's take a look at our objects here and let's see if this is even running, because this might not even be running through. So let's come in here and say gd.print loading level info, and then let's see if this is even getting to this point, because it might be, it might not be. It just kind of depends. So we'll say load game, click load, and it is loading our level info. So we are getting this far. but it doesn't seem like it's actually doing anything with that information. My guess is we're running into a bug where the item.get path is not correct, and we might have to go off of the name of the object. I ran into this issue before, so it's very likely that that's going to be the issue again. The best way to test that is if we put a breakpoint here, we click on the run and debug, we attach, and we type Godot, we attach to the project. Let's throw a breakpoint here as well, and then let me go in here, hit escape, load game, click, load. So it's playing this. We're going to come in here, load level info, and it's going to load that data. Now you'll see we have a dictionary, so we'll take a look at our dictionary. So position, rotation. So it looks like it attempted to load it. So let's see what happens if we pick up this object here and we throw it. And there we go. We're going to hit escape, save, escape, load, click on our load, load. And I'm going to get rid of those guys, hit play. And there you go. You'll see that we reset, but that object didn't. So it is working. It's just not pulling back our player information. And what that makes me is that our player, let me see. Let's take a look at this. So our player is part of Savable. So in theory, it should get picked up, especially since I think the data is correct in our scene items correct as well. So if we take a look, we are saving our player. We'll disconnect. We are saving our player information. So the question is, why are we not returning our player properly? So what I'm wondering is, when our scene gets instanced, is our player getting moved by the load screen? So this might not, you might not run into this issue if you're not following my tutorial too closely, but if we take a look at our load screen, let's see. When we load a level, we're loading it, we instance it, we do a threaded get, we change our scene, we move our player right here. So what I think we need to do is, if our game manager.instance loading from save, if we are not loading from save, then we can do this. So I think I know what's going on. So basically this is fine. So what's going on is this is running. And then once everything's done, then our game manager.instance is gonna set our pause to false. And what we should probably do is we should set loading from save to false right here as well. So we'll do game manager loading from save is equal to false, like that, instead of doing it here in our level 1 wake up. Now, the reason why I came to this conclusion is because if you look at the way our loading screen works, is it instances our level right here, which means our ready gets ran. And as soon as our node gets ran, and as soon as that happens, it moves our player. And then it sets loading from save equal to false, which runs this, which allows this to work. So that's why it's an order of operations issue on my part. So that's the reason why we have this issue. So now, hopefully, if we've done it correctly, we can come in here, we can hit refresh, we can go start game, we can pick up our object, move it over here, click, escape, save, run over here, escape, load, click, load, spacebar, and it'll bring you right exactly back to where you started. So awesome. Now it works. So now the question you might be asking, okay, so what if I come in here, right? The door opens, I hit escape, I save, and then I hit escape and I load, and I click, and then I load. Well, now you'll notice the door is closed. So why is that? Well, that's actually another really interesting thing. So what we need to do is we need to set objects and events to be savable as well. So something like this door, which is an interactable object, you can see right here, it is a door node interactable. We need to make it savable. So we can say comma savable and then implement that interface. So we can say implement interface. We can come down here And then we can basically just copy and paste our save and load code just like we've been doing. So we can come in here, copy this bit of code, come over here, and then paste it. And then instead of just saving our rotation, we can come in here and save our, I believe we want to do door open. So we can come in here and save our door open like so. And then we can, of course, load our door open as well. So we'll just copy, paste, grab our door open, paste, and then change this to a Boolean like that. And now we're saving our door as well. And this extends also to events. So even if we store our door, we need to store that this event has been triggered, right? So we could go in and actually save that event, or what we could do is we could go to where our event manager is, which in this case is our actual scene manager here. So we could make this a savable as well. Click on this, implement that interface, and here's our save and load information for that. And if you take a look at this, we can actually come in here and basically return a new dictionary string, bracket, and pass in whether or not these events were fired. So if I remember correctly, we have a child room door open, child room play. So we can come in here, say bracket, paste, comma, go up here, copy, go up here, bracket, paste, comma, paste, like that. And we'll need to make this a gd.var to str, like so. And I'll just copy this, paste, close parentheses, and then do the exact opposite when we want to load our data. So we can come in here, say this guy is equal to bracket, bool gd.str to var data bracket, and then grab this one right here, semicolon, copy, paste, and then do this one as well, like that. And then all we have to do is go into our node here. We can go to groups, type savable, and that's it. And then we can go into our game base, hit refresh, start game, come in here, grab this guy, open up our door, throw it like that. We'll let that finish opening. We'll hit escape, save, and then we'll close our project. So we'll refresh our screen, load, click, load, spacebar, and we ended up somewhere that was unexpected. Why did that happen, I wonder? Interesting. So something's going on. So let's come in here and let's retry saving real quick. I want to see if I get a brand new save. I come in here, grab this guy, drop it right there, hit escape, hit save, alt tab out, come in here, go into our most recent version, double click on it, Control Shift P, format. So it doesn't seem like it's pulling back our information properly. It's saving our data properly, but it doesn't look like it's loading it properly. So if I come in here, escape, load, this guy, load, spacebar. Interesting. Oh, that's because I'm missing my door. So if I go to here and I take a look at our level 1 wake up and I click on our door, it's not part of the savable group, so that's why. Okay. Let's add it to the savable group and let's try this now. So we'll refresh. That's my fault. So hit start game, spacebar, pick up an item. Let's come over here, open up the door, throw it like so. Hit escape, save, and then come into the next scene like this. Escape, load, spacebar, and there we go. And if I run back here, it doesn't reopen the door. It is as if I left that room. And there we go. Easy enough. Now, if you want to learn how to save the state of each level and have it so that when you go back through areas, it has all of that information, let me know in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to add that. But right now, this tutorial is probably almost 3 hours long. So I'm going to push pause on it and then do a follow on if you guys want. So that's pretty much how you make a super flexible save and load system inside of Godot. So we talked about how to actually build that system, like we planned it all out and designed it. Then we actually put that plan into action. So we built out our basic save load system. Then we added in save slots. Then we added in a pause menu to handle that save slots. We also built out a cool save interface. And then finally, we went in and actually made our stuff flexible and able to save every object in our scene that we want to save. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, if you dislike this video, go and hit that dislike button because I'm here to make content for you guys. This video was a viewer suggested video, so if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to take a look at them. Or jump on my GitHub, link is in the description, and put in a suggestion. I always look at those first to make content. That's how I approach everything with this channel. It's based off of what you guys want to see. So please let me know. Currently, I'm working on a Steam integration tutorial. That one's going a little bit on the slower side, but I'm hoping next week I can finally get it out. And hey, if you have any questions or comments, please hit me up in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to help you out. Or jump on my Discord, link is in the description, and anyone there will be happy to help you out. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you all next time. Thanks.